So in this video, I'm not only going to review some football boots, but I'm also going to discuss what is a huge missed opportunity by Nike, because I know some people from the brand do watch these videos and they also read the comments. So not only am I going to share my own opinions that hopefully will spark some change, not in the current generation, but the next generation of Mercurial. And they also read the comments, so feel free to voice your own opinions as well. The boots that I'll be talking about today, though, are the brand new Nike Mercurial Superfly 8 Elite, which I realize that was a very gloomy intro. This is an excellent pair of football boots. They retail for the same $275 retail price, but in comparison to the Vapor 14, which is $25 less expensive, all you really get is some extra Flyknit around your ankle. And don't get me wrong, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that Nike offers two slightly different variations of effectively the same football boot, but I think there's a lot they could have done with the Superfly this time around that they just chose not to do for whatever reason. I'm going to discuss that. We're going to go over some of the tech specs and new details of the latest Superfly, and also talk about whether or not you should be looking to upgrade from the Superfly 7 into the Superfly 8 if you're just a fan of this series in general. We'll also, of course, take a look at how they fit and feel on feet. So if you're interested in learning more, please stick around, watch the entire review, and if you're interested in a pair for yourself, I'll leave a little pop-up on screen, or you can click the first link down below. That's going to take you to the review page on my website, where you'll find Buy It Now links with exclusive SR4U coupon codes, where you'll be able to pick these up below their normal retail price. Really quickly, because I do know a lot of people care about this, they do come in a regular box, and as far as extras go, as you get with pretty much any top-end model from Nike, they do include a string bag, which, as you can see, is super fly. It's a very cool string bag, pink on one side with the Mercurial branding, and then kind of translucent on the opposite side with this kind of flat laid out blueprint of the upper. Obviously the Mercurial M logo again, and then the mismatched strings on either side. Very cool as well. Overall, this gets a string bag rating of 4 out of 5.1. As for the performance side of things, if you haven't yet already seen it, I would strongly recommend checking out my review of the new Vapor 14 Elite, especially if you want a more technical breakdown of exactly what's happening with the latest generation of Mercurial. But the reason why the Vapor is particularly relevant this time around is not just because it's pretty much identical to the Superfly minus the collar, of course, but because we've kind of been complaining about the Mercurial series for the last 2 generations being the same, but trending more towards the Superfly side of things. Because obviously when Flyknit was first introduced into the Mercurial series, we had the Superfly 4 and the Vapor 10, the Superfly being Flyknit, the Vapor being Teijin synthetic. That would remain the case for the Superfly 5 and Vapor 11. And then once we got the Superfly 6 and Vapor 12, both boots transitioned into being the same thing, Flyknit uppers, and people complained that the Vapor was no longer a Vapor. Well, we are now 3 generations past that, and the Vapor is now a Vapor, but the Superfly is no longer a Superfly. Nike can't seem to make up their mind. And we're going to take a closer look at the boots in just a second, but I just want to float this idea out there, and it's not a particularly original idea, but I think someone at Nike needs to hear it. Was this not the perfect opportunity for the Vapor and the Superfly to once again be 2 different models? They spent all this time and effort and research and development in popularizing Flyknit uppers, only to basically throw it away in the next generation of Mercurial. And what they've come up with as far as this new synthetic material is concerned is excellent. I would say it's equally as good as the already fantastic Vapor 13 and Superfly 7, but they even called it Vaporposit, which would imply that it's something that shifts back towards the traditional Mercurial Vapor. Why not make the Vapor synthetic and maintain some variation of the Superfly 7 Flyknit upper on the Superfly 8. And call me crazy, I am after all a self-proclaimed boot nerd, but if I were a regular consumer, and if you're watching this video, you probably fall into the same category as me, if the Vapor and the Superfly featured 2 different uppers like they once did, I would be much more inclined to buy both of them rather than just one or the other, because that's really the choice that Nike is currently asking you to make. Do you want the low-cut Vapor or do you want the mid-cut Superfly? The cut is effectively the only difference between them, so if you pick this over this, there's really no reason to buy the other one. Unless, of course, you bought the Vapor, sprained your ankle, and then thinking that you were going to get some ankle support out of this floppy collar, you spent the extra money on a pair of Superfly Superflies for your return from injury. Talking specifically about the Superfly elements of this new Mercurial, of course you do get the DF, which stands for Dynamic Fit collar, which a lot of people have pointed out features pretty much the exact same design and cut as the Superfly 5, which is true. The cut is now straight across the top. It no longer has that kind of angle, lower at the front, higher at the back design. And in general, it wraps your ankle really nicely. I would say that this is a slightly softer Flyknit material than what was used on the last 2 generations of Mercurial. And overall, it's probably the thinnest collar we've ever seen on a pair of Superflies. So for all of you that are convinced that this is actually going to provide some ankle support, there is less ankle support on the Superfly 8 than all previous models, something to keep in mind. The construction in the heel, the fit in the heel does not change from the Vapor despite the addition of the collar. All that they've really done have just extended the material that would normally be cut off here higher up the ankle, so something to keep in mind as well. Fit and sizing does not change regardless of whether you go for the Superfly or the Vapor. Of course, that Flyknit does extend across the top of the foot as it normally would on the Vapor as well. You do miss out on the pull tab. That of course is a feature of the lower cut Vapor 14. You don't really need it though. You can kind of just grab onto the back of this. And honestly, I think the finishing on the back of the collar in general is maybe a little bit less premium than what we've seen on all past variations of the Superfly. It's not to say that it's cheap, but it's just aesthetically not as pleasing. As for the performance of the boots as a whole, if we're comparing this to the outgoing Superfly 7, which was an excellent football boot, I would argue objectively the best Superfly model ever made, even though it was technically the same as the Vapor 13, this is still very good. It's similar in almost every single way, but every single element has been modified ever so slightly, some more noticeable than others. And for all of the, I don't want to say whining, but let's say complaining that I've done that the Superfly is no longer Flyknit, which I still think it should be, if I'm comparing this to a previous Superfly model, while it is very similar to the Superfly 7 in a lot of ways, the feel of this upper, especially when it comes to touch on the ball, is actually pretty reminiscent of the Superfly 4 with the full Flyknit upper. That was probably the thinnest Flyknit upper we ever got on a Superfly. So for those that really like the feel of that boot, I don't want to say that these are exactly the same, but if I compare this to past Superfly models, that's the closest comparison. As for the technical side of things, the biggest change coming from the Superfly 7 is going to be this new upper, which of course gets away from Flyknit and transitions into this new material that is unfortunately called the Vaporposit, which doesn't make a lot of sense given that this is the Superfly and not the Vapor, but that's Nike for you. The synthetic material itself is, as I've been saying, a true synthetic rather than more of a sock-like knitted upper that we've been seeing on the Mercurial series for the last 2 generations, where this relates closer to something like the Tahitian synthetic found on a Vapor 11 or a Vapor 10, maybe even a Vapor 8, but not quite as soft as that. So when you compare this to the outgoing Superfly 7, it's a little bit thinner, it's a little bit more raw, it's more of a true barefoot sensation, but you do compromise, I would say, the comfort ever so slightly in that it doesn't have the same softness and pliability of the full Flyknit upper of the previous model. It's a layered material where you can very clearly see all of the layers. That's a huge part of the marketing of this boot as well, where Vaporposit features an internal Avail Q liner where you can see different structure elements in the upper are highlighted in different colors, all fairly self-explanatory as well, and somehow, according to Nike, this has been inspired by the wings of a dragonfly. I'm not exactly sure how, but that's the story that they're wanting to tell right now. On top of that internal liner, you are going to find engineered mesh where you can see the pattern is kind of larger rectangles. As you get to the blue area through the forefoot, it ends up being little squares, and then it kind of spaces out again into slightly smaller rectangles through the forefoot. That's a little bit of added structure without adding much weight or bulk to the upper. Then you have your synthetic on the surface, which is basically the new variation of Nike Skin. It's a thin polyurethane. It's a little bit more grippy. You can definitely feel the texturing of the engineered mesh underneath that. That's kind of just been fused into all of these little rectangles. And of course, you still maintain your ACC technology. The end result is an upper that feels slightly grippier on the ball when compared to the Superfly 7, but not by much. Across the top of the foot, they've effectively changed nothing. It's still the same central lacing system, one-piece upper utilizing a dual lace hole setup. They have changed up the weave of the Flyknit through the midfoot, but it's still the same stretchy feel. Not really anything that you're going to notice. That, of course, flows into the mid-cut collar of the Superfly. You have what they're calling speed wings in these little kind of glued on silver pieces that outline the outside edge of the internal heel counter. They do absolutely nothing, so it's like any modern football boot, not free of any kind of gimmicky element, but I will admit that it does look cool. It's just totally unnecessary in the grand scheme of things. Internally, the heel liner is pretty well the same as the previous generation. They added some perforations to the liner, but it's the same soft microfiber, pretty much the same amount of padding as well, and even the same general fit, so really nothing to complain about there. And then the insole is fully removable. That also remains completely unchanged. It does have some new graphics that correspond to the little numbers that are on the upper itself, kind of giving you all the different tech specs. I went over that in the Vapor video, but you can see it is the same type of foam with a little black foam insert on the underside that kind of connects to the underside of the sole plate to prevent it from sliding around. And then as for the sole plate and stud pattern, it's the same thing but different. And what I mean by that is it looks more different than it actually feels or performs. Of course, it is technically still a split sole, but the major design change, especially visually, is the spine that now runs directly through the middle of the anatomically shaped sole plate, connecting the stud plate in the forefoot and heel. Do you notice this? No. Does it really add any structure? Not really. And it's still the same arrow track design through the forefoot, which means that it has this nice kind of spring back effect. If anything, I feel like this sole plate is a touch softer than what we had on the previous generation, but you're only really going to notice that when you're holding the boots in hand. When they're on your feet, it's next to impossible to tell a difference. And then as far as the stud pattern is concerned, the FG layout, it is the exact same layout. The only thing that they've really changed is some minor details on the corners of the chevron studs that are now just straight up chevrons. It doesn't have that little extra detail on the very point, which again is such a minor detail that you just can't feel when you're playing in the boots. All in all, this is the one element of the previous Mercurial that really didn't need any significant improvement. So even though they haven't changed much of anything at all, it's still arguably the best sole plate and stud pattern on the market. I would say the stud pattern ranks a little bit higher than the sole plate, but it's a very solid package. And then when it comes to weight, just like the Vapor 14, the Superfly 8 actually sees a very slight weight increase in comparison to the model that it replaces, which is probably not what a lot of people were hoping for. In a size 9.5 US, you can see that the boots weigh in at 7.2 ounces, the equivalent of 204 grams, which is give or take 5 or 6 grams more than the outgoing Superfly 7. It's not an amount of weight that you're truly going to be able to feel on your feet. And in general, these still feel super light, especially given how tight they wrap your foot and how responsive the upper feels. But it's not impressive that they're heavier. So here are the boots on feet paired with some matching pink Pure Grip socks, which for those that don't know, it's my own brand of grip socks that are extremely affordable. They're available in a wide variety of colors for just $14.99 a pair. If you've wanted to try out grip socks before but didn't want to pay the ridiculously high prices that are out there, be sure to check these out. They're available now at puregripsocks.com, which will be linked down below in the description. As far as the feel of the Superfly 8 is concerned compared to the Vapor, there is basically no difference at all, other than the little bit of extra material that wraps around your ankle, which depending on the size of your ankle, it'll fit a little bit tighter or a little bit looser, but it's not actually impacting the lockdown or fit of the boot in the heel. That's all coming from the heel liner and the structure that's lower down below the collar. A lot of people have that misconception about mid-cut football boots in general. The collar is always an accessory, kind of an attachment to the upper, rather than something that is truly structural, which is part of the reason why it also doesn't really provide any ankle support. Nonetheless, the boots fit really nice, and I think the biggest surprise about this latest generation of Mercurial with this Vaporposit upper is how similar it ends up feeling to the outgoing Flyknit uppers. And I think part of the reason why is the liner, while very similar to what we had on the previous generation, now has this slightly softer microfiber material to it. So it ends up feeling fairly soft against your feet. They're definitely not as pliable and don't have that same level of cushion that the previous gen Flyknit ones did. But after 3 minutes or so, once you're over the fact that you're wearing the latest Mercurials, the upper ends up feeling very similar to the Flyknit, which is quite surprising. The wrap around your foot is fantastic. They haven't really modified the shape despite changing the upper. So if you fit in the previous ones, you're likely to fit in the new ones as well. This maybe has a little bit less stretch to it, but in general, they still feel very snug on your feet without suffocating your feet in any way. So as long as you don't have excessively wide feet, I think these will fit pretty much anybody. Just know what you're getting into with a tight fitting pair of Mercurials. And as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing these in my usual size 9.5 US, and the fit and the length is perfect. So if you're looking to order a pair for yourself, I would strongly recommend going true to size in order to achieve the best possible fit. So in conclusion, the Superfly 8 is a great football boot, but that doesn't change the fact that I'm at least a little bit disappointed with what they ended up being. I think they did a great job with the new Vaporposit upper, and the idea of trending back into more raw, thin synthetic uppers rather than slightly more padded Flyknit uppers that we've seen in recent years of the Mercurial is ultimately a pretty good move from them, but the sole plate remains pretty much the same, not that it needed much improvement. The collar is literally recycled from a Superfly that came out 3 generations ago. It's increased in weight from the previous model. The price has still stayed the same at $275, which is not a bad thing, but they're certainly not inexpensive football boots. And there's still not much of a reason to pick a Superfly over the Vapor unless you absolutely must have a collar. It's still a top-notch performer in the speed boot category, and I can highly recommend them, but is it really a true step up from the Superfly 7 that it replaces? Probably not. So if you're looking to upgrade just because you want the latest Mercurial, I think you'll be pretty happy with the Superfly 8. But if you're looking to upgrade thinking that these are going to be significantly better than the boots that you already have, they're just not going to be. I hate saying that football boot brands are getting lazy because there's so much that goes into making a boot like this. But after several years of the Vapor and the Superfly still being the same thing, I hate to say it, but I think these are a little bit lazy as good as they are. And I realize that's more of a half glass empty rather than a half glass full perspective, because this is still a fantastic football boot, but I think a lot of longtime Mercurial fans would agree with me in saying that the Superfly should go back to being an actual Superfly. Anyways, guys, that's it for my review. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to support it with a like. Again, if you're interested in a pair of the new Superfly 8s for yourself, you can click the first link down below. That's going to take you to the review page on my website, where you'll find buy it now links with exclusive SR4U coupon codes, where you'll be able to pick these up below their normal retail price. If you have any questions, as always, leave them down below in the comment section. If you aren't subscribed to the channel already, make sure you hit that subscribe button along with the little bell notification so you get notified when the next new video goes live. You can find all my social media information linked down below in the description as well. And other than that, guys, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.